Good morning. Welcome to the update for November 30th, 2021. I just pressed record. I am not going to be on camera today. I am in progress with 25 meetings happening around the same time. I am going to acknowledge, however, that a couple of things. While we have a handful of people on the call right now, we have some people in the breakout room because they're taking care of something related to the project. These are members of the actual research team. Also, where this is recorded, each of these sessions are shared beyond the folks here. So it may feel like not a lot of folks are getting this information because we are the only people in the room right now, but this is going beyond just the group that's present now. So what I'm about to do is I'm about to open up my PowerPoint to kind of get to the point for today, which is achieving a representative sample. And then I'm going to ask that those who are in attendance will, or those who are not able to join us at this time will use the links that I share consistently. If you have a question that cannot be answered at this time, if you come up with a question beyond this moment, that you use the link that I'm about to post in the chat, which I'm using to confirm the kinds of questions people are asking and to be able to answer them in a timely manner. I'm going to open it up from my, here it is here. And I'm going to post this in a second. So if you have a question, you can actually use this link to ask your question. If you can't answer it here, and if you are not in attendance, for those who are watching this later, I'm going to send this in an email as well if you have any questions. Okay, let me go back. And that's posted in the chat. Go back to sharing my screen. All right. Okay, so here we are. Today's discussion is on achieving a representative sample. Because everyone who joins in and or watches this on their own haven't necessarily attended all of the sessions, updates, I would just go over quickly some of the background information. Today is about achieving this representative sample based upon our task to complete the survey for the Baltimore City Police Department monitoring team, this community's experiences and perceptions of the Baltimore City Police Department. We consistently talk about who we are at Morgan State University, the Institute for Urban Research, and the idea that we have a research team that includes Morgan State University students and community members who are acting as community interviewers. Last time we all got together, we talked about the RFP, which the research team responded to in order to conduct this particular survey. And we acknowledged some specific folks for time 2, which include myself, the principal investigator, Natasha C. Pratt Harris. And one of the things that happens each time we do these updates is I have a meeting with the research team and we discuss where we are, what the next steps are in our process to carry this out. So I just met with my research assistants and my graduate research assistant and the coordinator, Aaliyah Moore. And one of our community interviewers was on a call and she's actually completing paperwork. And the monitors, we have a follow-up meeting, a debriefing after the fact, of which you'll learn more about what we talked about during that session. Last time we talked, I confirmed the schedule where we had to modify schedule based upon a whole host of things, primarily related to recruitment of participants and their follow through and or availability or interest in partaking in the community interview. So here we are, the end of November of 2021. We are still doing the 3 sample preparation because we are at least continuing to recruit participants. One of the things we talked about last time is following up, reaching out for the 3rd time based upon the random selection of addresses. For the 3rd time, we're going to be sending out some correspondence to recruit participants based upon the addresses that we currently have. And as always, we're acknowledging COVID-19 protocols because it's my responsibility as a social scientist a PI on this particular project and a person who will be engaging in some capacity with members of the community. We're acknowledging the risks related to COVID-19, and our research team are following through, doing interviews virtually, actually remotely. We're there for the most part on Zoom, on the phone, WhatsApp, any other technologies to engage with folks. I'm acknowledging that at this present time, the latest trend is something that we didn't talk about 2 weeks ago, was the Omicron variant. We've sent out the invitations on the right. The invitation flyer on the left is what's used for the postcards that have been shared with members of the community who are receiving these correspondence because their addresses were a part of a random selection of addresses. All of our research team members are CITI certified, and we take pride in privacy, confidentiality, and anonymity in this process. And the survey has been translated using the SCARF languages: Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Russian, and French. Last time we talked about community canvassing, what that means. If you want to have more information about that, you could take a look at the training that took place on the 9th of September, and then the update meeting that took place on the 16th of November. Now, today we're talking about achieving a representative sample, and achieving a representative sample happens based upon a few things. One of the things we acknowledged is that achieving a representative sample can be a part of it, can be by identifying participants using a random selection process. But the random selection process is not the only means to achieve a representative sample. We actually have in place a random selection process where we have what we call a random streets list of 27 streets in Baltimore City that were randomly selected. And from those random streets, we selected random addresses. Now, what we did in terms of to get to this point is for each of those streets, we were able to get a count of how many addresses were available on those streets. And in addition to identifying the number of addresses on those streets, we used a random tool to say, well, how many of those random addresses would be included in terms of addresses. So let's say a street had 100 addresses. We used a random generator to say, well, from that 100, there will be 20 addresses selected. And that random generator gave you the number that you would use to do the selection. And from there, we use the random tool available via Excel to identify the actual random addresses. So this is like we randomize nonstop in this process to identify these random addresses on these random streets. This particular screen acknowledges the process through November, invitations mailed for those random streets, the canvassing that was done using Google Maps, and the physical canvassing that was done, and postcard invitations mailed early November after the first round from September. And now we're at the point of doing the same thing. We've added a caveat, however. The next round of postcards will include a link to and a QR code to a video where there is going to be a human person, a member of the research team, describing this survey, describing what's on the invitation to persons who receive this mail. So we're hoping that this third wave of acknowledging what this is all about, getting to the people via the mail because of the random addresses, and having a video to invite them to participate will help us to not only recruit participants based upon these random addresses, but also the goal of achieving a representative sample because we've used this random selection tool. And we are acknowledging that in addition to random selection, a representative sample can be achieved by way of non-random means, which includes our capacity to exhaust the possibilities with these random addresses. We've engaged with folks, at least sending out mail. This will be the third time. And beyond that, when we look at the demographics of the participants, we would see, well, who's included in this survey? Do they represent some of the folks that we acknowledge as the hard to reach? Representation means being inclusive of the hard to reach, which is a part of the charge of the Institute for Urban Research at Morgan State University. So the hard to reach folks includes persons where English is not the primary language, members of the LGBTQ, persons who may be homeless. And we also identify persons who squeegee for a living as the hard to reach, underrepresented or have been underrepresented in research such as this. I'm going to pause for just a second, and I will resume talking about part one and the interview. Okay, thank you. So we are describing the random selection of participants. We've already talked about that. We are acknowledging that interviews have already taken place. We are still in the process of scheduling interviews, obviously. And last time we met, we talked about the role of the community interviewer. And we gave some detail about the actual survey itself. We actually showed on the last update, the actual survey itself, just to give some people a heads up on that. But the goal ultimately here is to discuss achieving this random sample, achieving this, my apologies, representative sample. So on the next slide, you'll see, again, the processes that were explained previously to get to the point of achieving a representative sample, the random selection of participants using random.org. This is discussed on the training of September the 9th. It's been brought up several times as we've done these particular updates, and acknowledging the hard to reach at the very bottom, that's with the visual. And on this screen, you see some detail regarding what Baltimore City looks like in terms of its demographics. We acknowledge as social scientists the limitations of the census, which we pulled this information from the census, where the census doesn't necessarily paint the picture of the totality of persons in a city like Baltimore or any other city throughout the country in terms of representation. So for example, the census doesn't necessarily have detail about the LGBTQ. We've talked about the realities of not being able to capture persons who may not have a consistent address. There is a group of folks in Baltimore that we would like to learn more about in terms of their experiences and perceptions, the persons who squeegee for a living. So certain caveats of certain groups are not included in a census, but we follow the census in order to get to the point of saying we're achieving representation. The participants, after we looked at the data, after we completed the part one of recruitment, which is based upon the random addresses and random streets, that they are 59.3% are between the ages of 18 to 64. At least 13.6% are 65 years or older. We're not communicating with folks who are under the age of 18, but this is where we would like to at least achieve to move to the point of representation regarding the numbers of folks based upon age. And of course, this can be, tweaked a bit because we are eliminating like 27% of potential participants because they're under 18, but at least we're going to be looking here at 60% or about being between 18 and 64. More than half of the persons in the city of Baltimore are identified as female. One of the limitations of a census is that transgender is not included. So part of our task with LGBTQ is to include that as a hard to reach and helping us to achieve representation. In Baltimore, okay, here we are, I'm sorry. So more than 62% of persons identify as Black or African American, 30% plus represent or identify as white. There are some limitations also with the census that we attempt to kind of acknowledge in the survey, asking questions that go beyond whether or not someone is Black or white, a Native American or Asian. There is a section that talks about persons who have 2 or more races, but this 2 or more races doesn't necessarily account for 2 or more ethnic categories. So again, we try to achieve some kind of understanding regarding that. And another piece is persons who, based upon the census, were veterans or members of the military. For the census of the 593,000 plus persons as of July 1 who were residents of Baltimore, or 585,000 plus persons who were residents of the city of Baltimore, 28,000 plus were veterans. So we want to make certain that we have representation for persons who are veterans. For persons who are foreign born, 8.1%. There's a question in the survey that speaks to whether or not someone was born outside of the United States. But again, everyone has to be at least 18 or older and reports that they live in the city of Baltimore. Because we do a selection of persons based upon random addresses, the possibility exists that if we identify an address that happens to be a dwelling, we're acknowledging that on average, 2.45 persons are living at any particular address in Baltimore City. Another piece is where we are in terms of English not necessarily being the primary language of all residents of the city of Baltimore. So 9.9% of persons in Baltimore between 2015 and 2019 were reportedly persons where English was not the primary language. 85.2% of persons or persons who earned a high school diploma or higher, 31.9% have earned a bachelor's degree or higher. So those are the things we're looking at when we are trying to determine if we've gotten to a point where we're achieving a representative sample, a sample that represents the people of Baltimore. There's a question on the survey about whether or not persons have health insurance. So based upon the data from the census, 7.5% are the representative of those who aren't persons who with health insurance. There's a question in the survey about that, making sure those folks are included. If persons are working, 61.8%, or persons who are working who are female, and that's 60%. So again, we want to check those types of things to confirm if we're achieving a representative sample. And lastly, whether or not persons are in poverty. According to census, 21.2% of folks are identified as those living in poverty. We don't ask questions about like income and alone, and let me go back, income alone to kind of then confirm whether or not someone will be identified as a person who's in poverty. We do ask questions like, do you have basic needs money? Do you have medical care money? Do you have leisure money? Do you have food money? Do you have health insurance? Those types of things to speak to the life that persons are having, that will speak to the potential that the sample that we identified is, we're moving to the point of having a sample that is representative. So with all that being said, I'd like to know if you have any questions that we can answer between now and noon when we have to conclude this particular update. And again, this link is the link that's in the chat that we could use to pose a question. If we have someone who takes a look at this video and they have a question where they obviously weren't available to chat, during this session, they weren't available to be a part of this session, you can share this link. In addition to me sharing this video beyond the research team and the monitors, this video is obviously shared with members of the community. This link will be available for those who want to ask questions where they were not able to ask today. Okay, with that being said, I'm concluding this discussion, and I'll be meeting with Seth and Megan shortly. I'm going to give us 5 minutes to log off and log back in so we can get started on the debriefing discussion. Thank you so much for your time. Take care. Take care, Mr. Olson.